What's up, guys? It's Parnellyx, and this is going to be a Warwick matchup summary. It's not going to be a matchup guide. The key difference is that I'm not going to be super detailed. I'm going to kind of give you kind of the gist of how I feel matchups play out for Warwick. Whether they're easy, medium, or hard, etc. I'll try to explain some of the matchups, but assuming that I feel like I have information to provide, but for the most part, it's going to be somewhat, vague and blanket terms. It's just going to kind of give you a good idea as to how this matchup should play out from the perspective of a Warwick player. And I'll try to give you some tips throughout. So we'll go ahead and just get right into it. So to start off, we'll talk about the favorable matchups. And just for the sake of like every single section in this video, when I say like favorable, for example, it means it means a lot of things. It ranges from very, very easy to just kind of easy. So these champions feel differently. Some of them are easier than others, but for the most part, these are just favorable. So just like keep that in mind. But there's a lot of champions that I consider favorable matchup for Warwick right now. That's why I feel like Warwick is in a pretty good spot in the jungle. Especially there's some meta champions that you'll see in this list. And that's why I feel like I have success in higher elo a lot of the times, is because Warwick doesn't really get countered by a lot of the meta champions right now. So that's good stuff to hear. But yeah, I'll just kind of briefly talk about how I feel about them. So Wukong, champion just got reworked. I think I've jungled versus him once, and so I don't really have much information on him. But he did. I have played against him in the top lane, and you just kind of just beat him in duels all the time. He's pretty reliant on his passive for dueling power, because his passive gives him a bunch of armor, but Warwick does a lot of magic damage, so yeah, matchup isn't too bad. Plus, you can hold Q to avoid the knockup on his ultimate. Shyvana can go AP or on hit. AP Shyvana is pretty easy and it's more popular, but generally it's pretty easy for Warwick to deal with. You can just build some MR so you don't get burst too hard, and as long as she's not like ridiculously fed, you'll be able to like lock her down in fights and just always be able to duel her. As she goes on hit Shyvana, she can actually start shredding you later in like the mid-late game. So you got to be careful if she gets fed, but you still just beat Shyvana in the early game. She's pretty weak early on. I'm a Shyvana player as well. So even though I'm a Warwick main, Shyvana's my secondary champion. So I just know her strengths and weaknesses more. Shyvana's pretty weak in the early game, so you got to like take advantage of that. Try to pressure her. She might be really low in the jungle, so you can potentially go for invades. Elise is a very popular champion in the meta, one of the most popular champions right now in high elo and pro play, and Warwick does a really good job at dealing with her. So she can definitely spam gank in the early game, and you're not going to be able to necessarily keep up with her all the time, but you definitely can counter gank early on. You can duel her early on pretty well when she normally she just beats everyone in duels, but with Warwick, you deal with her pretty well, and that's just because your E, if she like throws out a cocoon at you, you can press E before it lands, and you can absorb all of her bursts, so she can't burst you down too hard. And yeah, she just can't really duel you because you just duel her better. Also, when you hit level 6, that's when this matchup becomes super favorable for you. When you have your ultimate, she doesn't have an ultimate ability, so you can actually probably kill her a lot of the times, plus you just outscale her, so this matchup just feels really good overall. The Trundle matchup, I think, is easy. I used to consider this kind of a medium matchup. I don't know why, but recently every time I've played against them, it just feels super easy. It's potentially just because I go Warrior every time. I'm not sure if Cinderhawk would feel good or bad versus Trundle, but I know with Warrior, you just are able to duel him in the early mid game for the most part. So yeah, I don't know. You just feel like way stronger than Trundle, I think, in my experience. Zac matchup is a matchup that I think Warwick has countered Zac since basically since Warwick's been out, and it's no exception now. You have all the tools to deal with them, right? Like Zac has 3 knockups or just displacements in general, plus he has the dash on his E, or the jump on his E, and your Q is able to avoid all of those displacements, and it's also able to follow the dash on his E. So basically your Q just can counters his entire kit, and that's just basically why this matchup's good for you. So early mid game, you should be able to deal with them. Even late game if you snowball. But keep in mind, if Zac does get ahead, if you don't really get a good lead in the early mid game versus him, Zac's just a teamfight monster. He's a scaling tank, and he just teamfights really well. So make sure he doesn't get to that point. He can get scary at that, in that situation. Rek'Sai is a matchup that's good for Warwick because you're able to Q to avoid the knockup on his W, on his Unburrow. So if Rek'Sai is ever, walking up to you and he's in his unburrowed form and he wants to knock you up, just hold Q and you won't get knocked out. Pretty simple stuff. Also, you can follow his tunnels and stuff like that. But one interesting thing that I started doing a lot more this year, I don't know when I figured this out, but I think it was actually the season I learned it. When Rek'Sai ults you, and if you press R right before his R lands, your R will actually go off first. And this is important because it means that your ultimate damage will hit, and it can actually heal you before his execute damage hits you. So if you time your ultimate correctly, remember, don't rush it, or else you're going to waste your ultimate. Let's just assume that Rek'Sai ults you at 10%. You're at 10% health, and he ults you, and he thinks he's going to kill you. You can actually time your ultimate so that you can heal up before it hits you, and then his R will not kill you, and then you can just turn the fight around. So it's just a really good interaction. But yeah, keep in mind it's not as easy as I think I make it. Oh, it kind of is as easy as I make it sound, but you actually have to know the timing pretty well. Rengar is a pretty simple matchup. You're just able to duel him for the most part, unless he gets super fed. Now, Rengar and Silicues generally get fed, I guess, but you can definitely you just generally out duel him, out skirmish him in the early game. Again, he's a burst champion, so you can just press E to avoid all of his burst if he tries to jump on you. The one key thing, though, to keep in mind when you're versing Rengar is you don't want to ult him when he has 3 or 4 stacks of his ferocity, because if he has fully stacked ferocity when your ult lands on him, he can just press W and he'll just cleanse your ultimate, remove your ultimate completely, and that's obviously not good. So make sure you don't rush your ultimate versus him. You have to pay attention to his stacks. But if he's at 0 or 1 stacks, then you should be able to just ult him and pin him down. Kha'Zix is another burst champion. That's an assassin in the jungle that just kind of gets shit on by Warwick. He can get a lead, especially if he goes a bruiser build, but if he goes a lethality, just build armor, and you just are able to duel him most of the time in the early game, mid game, late game, everything. Basically, you're always able to duel him. And also, just make sure you use your E when you get low when you're fighting him. Make sure you don't rush using your E. That goes for every champion, but especially Kha'Zix. Xin Zhao is a matchup that I think a lot of people struggle with. I know a lot of people mention they struggle versus Xin Zhao, but this matchup is actually pretty easy. The key thing is when you're dueling Xin Zhao, you want to make sure that you hold Q to avoid the knockup on his Q. So when he dashes on you and he presses Q, and he's like 1, 2, 3 on that third hit on his Q, you want to make sure you hold Q before it hits. But you want to make sure you hold Q before that third hit hits you, and you won't get knocked up. And if he doesn't knock you up, you beat the duel. Or you beat him in the duel. And then, of course, again, you want to make sure you use your E when you're on low health. So, again, very bursty. But, yeah, you're able to snowball pretty hard. And if you get fed versus him, he can't really do that much. Taliyah is a matchup that is pretty good. Or, sorry, it's really, really good post-6. Pre-6, it's kind of... it's not like you can really do that much versus her because she has range, she has roaming power. So if she's able to snowball pre-6, the matchup can become difficult. But if she doesn't, once you have your ultimate, you're able to just jump on her all the time and just kill her whenever you feel like it, basically. Her main defensive tool is to use her W to knock people away. She wants to use her seismic shove to shove people away. That's basically what her entire kit revolves around, right? And with Warwick, you can hold Q to avoid the shove. So it's pretty self-explanatory. Just hold Q when save your Q for when she uses her W, and she can't peel you off, and she can't also do the damage with her E. So it's just really good overall. Set matchup is something I haven't really played much of recently, but you can use your Q to dash behind him when he presses W to avoid his Falcon Punch. You can also use your Q to avoid his E and his ultimate. But keep in mind those are basically instant, so it's not like you can really react to them. You have to kind of predict. But you're able to basically stat check him a lot of the times. If he gets ahead, you really can't because his passive is pretty strong. But for the most part, especially set in the jungle, he's just pretty vulnerable to work. Nidalee is a matchup that is really good because Nidalee, how Nidalee functions is she wants to just shit on the enemy jungler. That's how she's designed. She wants to just just dominate. She wants to take over the enemy jungle. She wants to be able to kill the enemy jungler as much as possible. She's not like, she can gank obviously, but she wants to just play super high tempo and dominate the early mid game in the enemy jungle. But the problem is versus Warwick, she can't really do that for the most part. Again, she's basically an assassin who she wants to jump on you and just burst you. She wants to hit a long range spear, jump on you and burst you, and obviously you can press E to avoid that burst, and you can just heal up. So press you can plus R in team fights, so the matchup's just pretty easy overall. Then there's Kayn, and Kayn, there's the two forms of Kayn. Kayn in general is really easy to play against in the early game. So yeah, you should be able to just safely farm up and get your items that you want in the early game. He's pretty weak. So that's why this matchup's just easy in general. But Red Kayn can actually potentially duel you if he gets fed. So that's kind of a scary matchup if he gets red form and he's fed. But if he goes blue Kayn, Kayn's just trolling, because this is probably the easiest jungle matchup you'll have. Because even if blue Kayn gets fed, you can just stack some armor and he can't one-shot you. And of course you can press E to avoid his burst. So yeah, he won't be able to one-shot you, and you're probably gonna be able to just duel him the entire game, even if he gets fed. I've definitely like shut down some super fed Kayns before, and it's impossible for them to play the game. And then lastly, in the favorable matchup, I will talk about Silas, and this is a matchup that's a little bit more popular now. Now Silas is just really weak in the early game, especially at farming. But in the early mid game, especially in the mid game, he starts to get better at dueling people. But Warwick, for the most part, can out-duel him. So as long as he doesn't get really fed, you should be able to just out-duel him in general. Okay, so now we'll talk about the medium matchups, and these matchups are more the 50-50 matchups, and they're kind of more the uninteractive matchups. So these are the ones that you usually can't really do anything versus these champions. Usually you can't like run them down and kill them, or you can't really prevent what they want to do. But they don't necessarily shit on you, so it's just kind of you just gotta kind of ignore them for the most part. And that'll be a common theme that you'll notice when I explain these. But I can't really touch on every single matchup here, just because there's not a lot of information I can give. But I'll touch on what I can. So we'll talk about Shaco first. This matchup seems pretty hard from the get-go, just because he has he runs Ignite, and he has a lot of tools up his sleeve with his Q, his W, and his R. But he's pretty weak in the early game, so he shouldn't ever really be able to duel you, even with Ignites. But you can't ever really kill him for the most part either, just because his boxes, his Q, his R, he has so many tools to just disengage. But with that said, there is a secret to fighting him sometimes. You want to, so if you're ever about to fight Shaco, you want to press W before you get in combat with him. And what you can do is you can mark him with your W, and if you press his Q, you'll be able to see the blood trail of his Q, so you can kind of follow him. And if he presses R and he duplicates himself, you'll be able to see the real Shaco. So he can't trick you with his clone if he has your your W mark on top of him. So, but even if you do manage to outplay him that way, like a lot of times he's able to just kind of escape. So this matchup is just pretty interactive in general, and you just gotta like ignore him a lot of the times. Graves is a matchup that this used to be a lot harder, but with Nimbus Cloak, once you have Red Smite and Nimbus Cloak, you have team out Red Smite. You're gonna be able to smite him, and you're gonna be able to actually like run up to him without getting kited too much. So matchup's not too bad, but yeah, it's just kind of whoever gets ahead is able to kill the other. So that's just kind of how it goes. Hecarim is more of a matchup that's kind of I don't know. I think this is kind of unfavorable for the most part, but I haven't really played against it much recently. If he runs Ignite, I actually think going Ignite Smite Hecarim versus Warwick is kind of bad, because it means you're able to actually disengage versus him. So if he ignites you in a fight, you can actually fear him away and run away. But if he runs Ghost, he's able to ghost you down and actually duel you. So for the most part, he can actually duel you by default in the early game. You have to get a lead versus him. So this matchup's actually probably kind of unfavorable, but for the most part, it's just kind of whatever. Echo is a broken champion right now. I will say that. Even though he's a medium matchup, champion's annoying. So if he gets ahead, champion's really, really annoying. But again, he's an assassin, so you're gonna be able to press E to avoid his burst. He can't really like kill you that easily, but yeah, he has his ultimate, so you can't ever really kill him either. You can follow his ultimate with your Q, but for the most part, you don't want to do that, because if you follow his ultimate with your Q, A lot of times you'll take damage from his ultimate, and he'll just be like full health from his ultimate. So yeah, you just don't want to do that a lot of times. Rammus, I honestly have not played this matchup recently. I know a lot of people. So normally I wouldn't be able to really give much information, but a lot of people struggle with this. So when Rammus presses W, do not attack him. Yes, he can taunt you. If he taunts you, you have to attack him, right? But the moment that his taunt wears off, you just stop attacking him until his W wears off. That's all you need to know. Jarvan matchup. This matchup seems easy because you can avoid his EQ. You can hold Q to avoid the knockup on his EQ combo, but you can't really prevent him from doing much in the early game because he's just an early game ganking machine, and he's just really strong, and you can't usually like fight him in the early game either. So even though you have the outplay tools, it's just kind of hard to just kind of prevent him from being Jarvan. So if you get ahead and the mid game's pretty free, but if he gets ahead in the early game, then not much you can do. Lee Sin. This matchup has historically been a very easy matchup for Warwick, and it still should be, but the problem is Lee Sin is broken right now. So because Lee Sin is broken right now, and he has been broken for a while, matchup's just kind of medium now. The main thing that's changed is just he's able to kind of fight you in the early game. He just does. He's got his damage and his lifesteal and his W have gotten buffed enough that now it's actually kind of hard to duel him like level 3, level 4. So you have the tools to outplay him. You can hold Q to follow his dashes. You can hold Q to avoid his ultimates. The knockback on his ultimate, which is really funny, by the way, if you're able to, if he tries to insect you and you hold Q to avoid it, it's really, really funny stuff. But yeah, I'd say like he's just really strong. He's such a strong champion right now in the early game. So yeah, you just kind of just like hope. You got to avoid skirmishes. That's the main thing. You can probably duel him in the early game, but if you're ever fighting a 2v2, he generally has the advantage early on. So make sure you avoid that and just try to make it to the mid game even or ahead. Gragas is a annoying matchup because his E, even though his E is a knockback, it's also a stun. So if you hold Q on his E, you're just gonna get stunned, and yeah, it just basically overrides your Q. So it's really annoying. It's kind of a cock block tool, but you can hold Q to avoid his ultimate's knockback, which is kind of nice. And you can usually duel him, but again, he can just kind of press E and he can usually press E and then Q and just kind of disengage a lot of fights. So it's kind of hard to really do what you want. And then Ivern. So Ivern matchup is it's kind of unique. It feels kind of difficult, but the thing about this matchup is you want to just because he's kind of a slow farmer because of his passive, and because he can't really duel very well, you just want to power farm. You want to counter jungle a lot. So you don't want to really try to contest him in ganks. Like in 2v2s and stuff, usually he has an advantage, but usually you just want to farm as much as you can because you just outpace him in the jungle, and you also want to counter jungle him, take his camps. Even if he spots you during a counter jungle, a lot of times you can get away because what's Ivern gonna do? He's gonna Q you and he's gonna like ask for his teammates to rotate. So as long as you don't put yourself in a position to get rotated on by his teammates, should be good to go. So yeah, that's the Ivern matchup. So now we'll talk about the unfavorable matchups, and these are gonna be the matchups that are just. It's going to be really hard to get a lead versus these champions. Some of these champions you can get a lead versus them. Well, usually against these champions, you're able to, if you get a lead on them, you'll be able to, kind of run over them, I guess. But it's really hard to get an advantage. They're just kind of naturally stronger than you. So Nocturne, we'll start off with, is he's just really hard for you to duel in the early game. He also outganks you level 6 with his ultimate. So basically, the main issue with Nocturne is his fear and his W, because what can happen is, so when you try to duel him, if he manages to use his spell shield on one of your abilities, either your Q or your E, it's really easy, by the way, for him to use a spell shield on your fear. Then he's going to get an attack speed bonus, and he's going to be able to turn the fight. So it's really hard to ever really like fight him. If you do get a lead, I'd say this is like the easiest of the unfavorable matchups that I'm going to talk about. Just because, yeah, I don't think it takes like that much of a lead to be able to beat him, but I'd say this is definitely not a matchup that is really good for Warwick. Second of all, there is Udyr, and this is probably the second worst matchup for Warwick in the jungle. Now, the one caveat to this matchup is the fact that if the enemy team picks Udyr, they have to play Udyr the entire game. But as far as like the head-to-head matchup, Warwick versus Udyr, it's not really good for Warwick. Well, it's horrible for Warwick actually in the early game. Assuming Udyr knows how to actually play aggro. If Udyr like constantly tries to invade you, he constantly tries to fight you, and he's not like super like soft and everything like that. He's not just running around farming and ganking and stuff like that. If he's actually trying to pressure you, you cannot ever fight him, and you can't really get away from him either. So you're just gonna die. So what I actually do against Udyr is I actually go Ignite Smite a lot of the times. I'm gonna probably try Barrier as well, but I haven't really tried that out yet. So yeah, usually I go Ignite Smite versus Udyr, and it's pretty good. Basically what it does is it just allows me to be able to duel him in the early game so that I can scale up and actually farm. Because what happens is if I take Flash versus Udyr, and the Udyr just like invades me constantly, I will not be able to farm any camps, and I'll be useless the entire game. And if I'm useless the entire game, I don't care about Flash. So that's just kind of what I do. But the matchup's really, really hard early on. But if Udyr doesn't shit on you in the first 10 minutes, then yeah, he's Udyr, and champion's pretty terrible past that point. Karthus is really very, very popular, has been for the last year, and he's still not nerfed. Riot, I don't know what the deal is, but this champion he just power farms way harder than anyone else in the game, so it's hard to keep up with him. He almost always has like a level XP lead and gold lead on you. If you do get ahead of Karthus, you'll be able to usually like invade him or just kill him pretty easily. But if you don't have a lead, so technically you can kill him in certain situations, but it's always kind of risky. So even though you can actually kill Karthus a lot of the times in a 1v1, and if you like catch him out in his jungle, because of his passive, he can actually kill you back. And if you trade 1-for-1 with Karthus, it's not really good for you because Karthus just scales out of control. So that's kind of one of the main issues with this matchup. But if you get to the point where you got a decent lead and you're able to kill him fast enough, or you're going to be tanky enough, then you should be able to kill him without dying, and that's good for you. But at the end of the day, he still just he scales like a madman. So yeah, this champion's just kind of busted, has been for a while in the jungle. It's playable, but I actually have a special route against Karthus where I start my blue buff and I invade his red, and then I take his Krugs. It's a really very, very awkward, unique path that I take, but I'm not going to really recommend it for you guys, but I do it sometimes with a cheese to get a farm advantage over him. But yeah, that's Karthus. And then last of all, there's Volibear. And Volibear, even though Volibear is kind of a bad champion, he just out-stat checks you the entire game. He's super tanky. You're never going to be able to do enough damage to kill him. Warwick doesn't do enough damage to kill champions like Volibear. But he does a lot of damage as well. He's also pretty disruptive, so you can't just ignore him. And yeah, you just gotta kind of avoid Volibear. That's how you play the matchup. But so yeah, just don't fight around him. Don't like fight 2v2s. Don't fight 1v1s with him. Just try to play away from him. But it's not very good because obviously, yeah, it's just not good because he's basically gonna be stronger than you the entire game. He just kind of shuts you down a little bit. Okay, so the last tier on this tier list is going to be the Olaf tier. And if you can't guess who's in this tier, you're probably stupid. But yeah, it's Olaf. And Olaf is... Olaf versus Warwick is like one of the harder counter picks in the jungle, just period. Honestly, in the game period, I'd say. It is playable for Warwick. Again, similar to Udyr, you can take Ignite versus him and try to be able to fight him more in the early game to match his duels, but even if you manage to survive the early game versus Olaf, when he's level 6 and just has his ultimate, and keep in mind his ultimate's on a super low cooldown, yeah, anytime he has his ultimate up, you just can't fight him. His ultimate just literally prevents your R from working. He can stand on top of you, and you can't R away, you can't R him. Your R will just go on cooldown. And then he basically just ignores your E as well, because obviously you can't get feared if he's ulting. And he also does true damage with his E, so the damage reduction doesn't really matter. Yeah, he just shits on Warwick completely. Hard to ever really get away from him. and this matchup's pretty bad. There's definitely situations where you can fight him. I think like pre-6, technically post-6 as well if he doesn't have his ultimate. But if you guys are like even and you're both like, if Olaf is like below half health, you should be able to actually probably beat him, because you're if you can open the fight with attack speed bonus, you should be able to beat him in the fight. But for the most part, you're just going to struggle. I mean, he's usually not going to be like 25% health walking around his jungle, right? Well, I mean, he might be to clear faster, but you're usually not going to be able to find him and just in a vulnerable position throughout the game. So this matchup's extremely hard. It's extremely easy for him to get ahead and snowball his lead. If you do get ahead, so if you need like probably like a 5 kill lead on him, honestly. Like if you're like 5-0 and he's 0-0, whatever. Yeah, you can probably start, you know, just stat checking him. But it's really hard to get to that point where you out stat checking Olaf. So that's why this matchup's really difficult, and he is my ban. So if anyone wants to know what you ban on Warwick, I highly recommend Olaf. There's other bans you can go with, like Morgana or something, but she's not like super meta right now. So Olaf. He's strong right now, and a lot of people are going to pick him, so ban Olaf. That's all I got to say about that. So to wrap up this matchup summary, obviously I wasn't able to include a lot of different matchups, and the reason being is because I haven't played against them recently, and I don't feel like I'm confident in giving a expert opinion on like how good or bad the matchups are. A lot of the matchups that you might be like asking about, that you're like sad that I left out, I just haven't played against them in like a year, so I can't, like, you know, things change. I can't really give a good opinion on how they play out or how they should be. So I'll just try to update in the future if something, you know, if I run into certain, you know, matchups that aren't included in this more. But for the most part, everything that I said in this video, or, you know, every champion I put in this video has been a champion that I've played against relatively recently, at least, and I feel like I actually remember the matchup enough to be able to give a good, solid opinion. That's not just me like lying. So yeah, so that's why I can't really like put every single matchup in here. But besides that, after this video, I'm going to post a video regarding Warwick builds, because there's new items, new changes to items that have come out in the recent patches, and a lot of people have been asking about that, death stand, stuff like that. So I'll update you guys on new builds here in like probably tomorrow or something like that. But yeah, I'm gonna be working on that, so just in case anyone's wondering. So sub if you want to see that, and yeah, peace out, have a good one.